So the Netflix series Monster just dropped a brand new season 3 months ago. Look, now that enough time have passed, I finally feel comfortable enough to talk about this series without feeling like I'm trend surfing or being exploitative. Or you just can't keep up with time, can you? Nah, I can't keep up with time for shit. One peaceful compliment before the storm. I like how this series doesn't feel like a period piece. You know, like one of those movies that are so in your face about the fact that they take place in a different time period. This series focuses so much on the story alone, I sometimes forget that there's almost a 40-year gap between me and these characters. And that is all the compliment I'll ever give, because although this series is not in your face about the fact that it is a period piece, this series is very much in your face about the fact that it is based on a true story. Now, what this series does is, instead of treating these events like actual stories, they look at the event from every single angle and try to milk it for its themes, messages, and commentaries, which butchered any narrative or even essence that you could get from these stories. It's funny because both the Jeffery Dahmer and Menendez brother story have the exact opposite problem. In this series, Jeff Dahmer looked like he's simple-minded, almost like he's also wondering why he is the way he is, when in reality, he is extremely self-aware, articulate, and completely emotionless. This could have been a perfectly fine case study about racism and homophobia, but they have to shove in this forced character study and ended up making Jeffrey Dahmer look like he's way more of a complicated person than he actually is in real life. In reality, his action is not driven by any sort of delusion or fucked up ideology. He is simply a man with no empathy and an addiction to raping corpses. The Menendez brothers are the exact opposite. They do have a fucked up rationale behind their crime. And instead of overcomplicating a simple character like Dahmer, this time they flatten and oversimplify these already complex people, looking at them through different point of views, portraying them as either cartoonish villains or cartoonish victims, which is made even more confusing in this season with the batshit tonal shift that happened like every 5 seconds. Apparently, this series is trying to use filmmaking techniques from dramas, horror movies, and character studies to tell a true story. Imagine if they tried to pull that shit off with a fictional story, the result would have been so disjointed and messy. You know what? Scratch that, because that shit have already happened in real life. Joker 2 for the whatever the fuck have the exact same problem as this Monster series. Now, I actually like the theme and messages of this film, but the way this movie delivers its message is so ham-fisted, it's like every single plot point is only there to deliver a message. The Monster series is basically like that, but on steroid. Right before the last trial, where the Menendez brother is definitely gonna lose, we cut to these jurors who we've never seen before, doesn't have any emotional connection with, and we'll never see again just to what? Prove a point? The Dahmer and Menendez brother stories are not stories. They are glorified news report. It's just that instead of reporting on facts, they're reporting on other people's personal opinions and point of view. I'm gonna stay off the morality for now. If there is one movie that properly show a true crime case as a narrative story, it would be Snowtown. Snowtown is a movie about an Australian serial killer who specifically targets child predators. This movie could have picked so many themes from the case, from the animal abuse to the nature of vigilante justice, but they only pick one: the abusive relationship between John Bunting and his accomplice Jamie Velasquez. Centering the story around one human relationship instead of focusing on the murders and all the social commentary surrounding it makes it feel like a coherent story with one sensical main theme, instead of a jumbled mess taken from the opinion of everyone surrounding the case. Unfortunately, considering that Snowtown is just as unbiased and unflinching as a fictional story, means that it is just as insensitive to the real-life people as it would with fictional characters. This film explicitly showed the rape of Jamie Velasquez with no censors nor consideration, and it also shows a full frontal nude scene of one of the real-life victims. It's interesting how both of these medias can be so insensitive for exact opposite reasons. While Snowtown doesn't give enough of a shit that it is based on a true story, Netflix's Monster focused too much on it. Erik Menendez have criticized the series through his wife's Twitter, saying that the show is dishonest, how the portrayal of his brother Lyle Menendez is just downright caricature, and that statement basically sums up everything morally wrong with the series. Because this series is trying to overly digest the story, they also ended up making two-dimensional caricatures of not only Lyle Menendez, but out of 90% of the very real people involved. Lyle is the evil mastermind, Erik is just a mere accomplice and victim. The very few time they do try to flesh out these people, they do so in the usual ham-fisted and violating way. Showing shit like Leslie Abramson carrying her new baby in the hospital to show her as a loving and caring mother figure. Which, can you not flesh out these people within the context of the story without breaching into their personal shit? Even the people you represent as the good guys wouldn't and doesn't approve of this strawman character you're building off of them. The way they handle the speculation around the Menendez brothers is just the worst. It's clunky and expositional. Dominic Dunn just talked there like he's in a fucking podcast, and it's not even that relevant to the main plot. It's just exploitive. If you wanna build mystery around the truth, you could do something similar to Danny Boyle's Steve Jobs, where most of the movie is just the characters talking behind stages about the major events in Apple's history. But I can see how that format doesn't give you enough excuse to show the Menendez brothers sharing together. Sick fuck. You see how the line between shitty writing and disrespecting the living fuck out of the very real people you're portraying starts to blur quickly? Presenting the story this way, or the way Ryan Murphy put it, looking through different reflection and refraction of a gem, pretty shit gem if you ask me, means you're also only looking at the most extreme side of both. If you look at any comment section from a Menendez case, you can see how the series have already radicalized people to one side or another, which is such an irresponsible thing to do to a case that's gonna have a retrial soon. A lot of this could have been avoided if the moral ambiguity is written with any competence. I know I just used Snowtown as a bad example, but let's take a look at one scene. Major spoiler for this one, where Jamie Velasquez is forced to watch the torture of his brother who have also assaulted him. You can see Jamie's internal conflict, because he is just as traumatized by his brother's action as he is by the shit they're doing to him, and ended up killing his own brother only out of mercy. You see how the nuance of vigilante justice is shown indirectly through the character's main struggle. That kind of depth basically doesn't exist in Netflix's Monster. There's no subtext left untouched, and every single conclusion is spoon-fed to you. The exact opposite end of Snowtown, where a movie succeeds at being respectful to real life instead, would be No Man of God, a film about the many conversation between Bill Hagmaier and infamous serial killer Ted Bundy. This film mostly takes place in one room without bringing up the victims, so there's no exploitation. I don't know if the real Bill Hagmaier was consulted on this film, but even if they didn't, this wouldn't have been nearly as bad as Monster, because they barely touch on the character's personal life, and the very few time they do, it felt appropriate. I'm kind of cheating by using this film as an example, because unlike Snowtown, which failed morally, this film does not fail as a narrative story. In that case, I guess the only weakness is no one would have been interested if this was about an original fictional serial killer, which isn't even a bad thing because Ted Bundy, as a matter of fact, exists in real life. As incomplete as this film's point might be, it is sure as hell better than Netflix's Monster, which is so bad the Jeffery Dahmer story doesn't even have a proper conclusion. In a genre where you could fail either morally or narratively, Monster miraculously failed at both. And there's nowhere else the strength and weaknesses of each aspect better shown than in the Golden Child episode of each season. Despite being the most recognized and critically acclaimed episodes of the entire series, most people don't seem to realize how much of an opposite Silence and the Hurt Man truly is. Silence is especially praised for creating a coherent narrative story in the perspective of the victim for once, making us feel devastated for this complete stranger and giving the most honor and respect to the victim. Which to that I say, are you fucking kidding me? Whether or not the relationship here is fictionalized, we're still looking at a very private part of a stranger's life that we don't have the right to know. Imagine you surviving or your family members dying from a serial killer. And then years later, you see your own house, your own face, and your own flesh and blood in a high-grossing Netflix series. Unpopular opinion, none of Jeff Dahmer's victims should have ever been famous. They shouldn't be famous because they're not supposed to be dead. The only reason why you know who Tony Hugh or Konoraksin Tansomphon is sad and depressing, and now that that's our reality, we shouldn't treat these people like public characters. Where if anything, telling the story of their personal private life is the respectful and honorable thing to do. Definitely memorialize these people, but their name doesn't deserve any more infamy. In contrast, none of the personal detail from the Hurt Men are ones that isn't already mentioned publicly in court. They're able to properly flesh out these characters without breaking real-life personal boundaries. Some parts of the dialogues are even lifted straight from the real speech that Erik Menendez did. It is no coincidence that this episode shared so much similarity with the aforementioned No Man of God, even down to the weakness, which is that they both feels like a great analysis of real life rather than their own complete stories. As well written and emotionally impactful as Silenced is compared to this episode, they're still only succeeding at the wrong thing, which is at invading the victim's privacy. And this episode ended up being the more respectful one by being the only episode in the entire series that isn't trying too hard to have a
The fucking point of view.